From the Grind Up with Jeff McClain. Real stories, real hustle, real success.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to From the Grind Up. I'm your host, Jeff McClain. This is a show where we dive deep into the real stories behind the hustle, setbacks, and successes in business and in life. Today's guest, AJ Hewitson. He's a commercial account manager for Paradise Chevrolet here in Temecula, and has a pretty amazing story I've talked to him about over the years. I've known him for probably about 15 years. I've been buying dozens and dozens, if not close to 100 vehicles from over the years.
Amazing.
And I'm glad to have him on the show. So thanks, AJ.
Yeah, glad. Thanks for having me.
So you're not just an account manager in your space, right? I mean, and this is, AJ's very humble. He's gonna be uncomfortable talking about some of this stuff, and other people that I know have talked about how elite really you are within your space. So what does that look like? How does someone measure success? Obviously there's monetary,
right,
ways, but compared to other peers and things like that, where do you sit and or stand in your space?
So in the car business, on the retail side, so the typical car dealership where people are going in and buy a vehicle for their family or themselves, average retail person sells about, if they're good, about 8 to 10 vehicles a month. And on the fleet side, that's kind of like baseline as far as, just being employed. If you're decent, if you do about 15, 18 consistently, you're good. If you were, doing, 20, 25, and if you're doing more than 25 consistently, like you're a stud. And for many years, I was selling about 600 to 800 vehicles a year. So that's, in the 50 to 60, vehicles a month category. So, it's part of it's volume and profitability, but also it's just the relationships that you have with customers. And just like your report card, when you keep coming back, you're doing a good job because the customer keeps coming back. So the majority of our stuff is from repeat and referrals, building relationships, and that's how you become successful.
Great. So, on this show, from the grind up, we just talked about the up part or the top part, what you've accomplished, what you've enjoyed. I know you do very well financially and take very good care of your family because of all this work that you've put in through the years. But obviously, we want to get back to the beginning, the roots, kind of where that all came from. Work ethic is something that's not a lot of people have anymore, not to the level that I'm sure it takes to accomplish what you've accomplished and what a lot of our guests have accomplished in life. So if you don't mind, let's go back to like when you were a kid. Were you? I'm assuming just like every other kid, throwing a baseball, playing catch, doing whatever. Did you always have that the bug, if you will, for selling stuff, or what created this?
Well, I mean, I've been a grinder. I mean, it's funny that the podcast is called that because like I've been a grinder, since I remember when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old when we'd sell books for school for fundraisers or sell candy or magazine subscriptions. And I was always, just the top guy that would chase it. And back then, I mean, you're getting some kind of cool, like a Game Boy or getting, some kind of toy or trip or something like that. And that was the drive. That was my why, was to chase it down. But even beyond the why of doing that, it was more so just the thrill of the kill of doing it and chasing it down, convincing someone to buy. And I really got into it. So it was young. I mean, it was like 8, 9 years old. I was already going after it.
Nice. So in doing that, I mean, would you say that, I guess I already know the answer, but it's more of a rhetorical question for people that maybe not in that exact space, because that's
right,
probably not the demographic listening to this, but you never know. But those early experiences, going to knocking on doors and having the door shut on you, people, all those things, all those no's that you had to learn to endure when you were a kid, clearly, laid the foundation for becoming an elite person in the sales space.
Well, and you're right. And, kind of like, some of the stuff that Tony Robbins talks about with neural pathways, if you've never done something before, the first time you do it, you're starting to blaze a trail, and then you do it again and you do it again and you do it again. And the more times that you do it, your brain maps the road to get there, because it's always trying to figure out, the smarter mousetrap of doing things. And then you fail and you have victories, and you kind of go back and forth with that. And so the pathways just get deeper and deeper ingrained. And eventually, you just continue to, sharpen your skills and master your craft of doing what you're doing. And I think the biggest thing, and this is also a Tony Robbins thing, is just being a lifetime learner. I'm always looking at just new ways of being better, overcoming objections, and, how to, have a customer buy from you instead of being sold to. Like in your experience of, me selling trucks to you, have you ever felt like you were sold into, so, this is a dangerous question to ask. Have you ever felt like you were sold into something, or do you feel, because let's stop there. Do you feel that's...
Yeah, no, it's a great, to your point, I was actually going to bring that same thing up. A lot of this show is going to be about sales and how to overcome objections and all the sales stuff. But I think that the approach in which you take is exactly that. I think 90% of people in the sales business have one goal in mind, and that is to sell them something, whether they want it, whether they need it, whether it's good for them or not, because they're trying to make money. And though you make money, you also, when you approach us with, because I don't always call you, hey, I need a truck. Right. Oftentimes you call me, and here's a good opportunity to get a truck. Right. And that's a sales tactic. I understand that, but there is a reasonable pathway for me. That makes sense for me. So to answer your question, no. But I think you're very skilled in that sense that you genuinely, of course, you want to sell trucks and make money, but it has to make sense for me. And I know many times when you've said, you know what, this doesn't make sense for you right now. Let's wait X amount of time, or let's find another one. Let's order this. Or there's been many times when you could have probably pushed a little more, and because of the trust that we've built over the years, I probably would have said, okay, AJ, I'll do this. But many times, if you said, no, you know what, I think there's going to be something better next week, next month, whatever. And so, yeah, that's how you earn long-term loyal guys who just call you. And I don't even ask you what things cost anymore, other than
just to know the difference of one to the other.
Right. It's like, I need one of these, set it up. Right.
Well, I hope my boss and dealership one isn't listening to, all the times that I could have made another sale and didn't push. But, like the philosophy that just from great mentors, if you educate somebody on, what the options are, why, what the purpose is, you tell me what your application is and I'll give you some options to choose from. People would much rather buy from you than being sold to. So if they're empowered with an education and they understand like why I'm recommending this, then you're kind of overcoming a lot of the fear and apprehension that you would come across, and everyone's more comfortable about it. And then also when it hits the fan and things don't work out, because that happens too, or sometimes things like those trucks I sold you that had speed governors that we didn't realize. And, and you're like, man, is there any way that we can make these trucks go faster? And, it was a bummer of a situation. And we worked through it, and now we just know that, we can't do that again. It's just, just to not, to be careful to make sure that it doesn't have that issue. So as long as you, replicate the good things and avoid the bad, then it works out.
So have you, looking back, kind of to your younger years, did you ever work other things? That weren't sales, or does it seem like everything you did? I know I'm assuming we'll get into many different paths and things that you did, but did a lot of it or most of it in one way, shape, or form be in some sort of sales role?
Yeah, pretty much. I worked in a restaurant, when I was a kid, and just one restaurant job. And other than that, it's always been, it's been in some kind of sales, between insurance and retail music and the car business. And just everything has been around a sales or consultative type, sales role.
Mm-hmm. And I will say too, like a point that I want to make is, most of the guests that we have on the show and that we will have on the show are just straight up entrepreneur business owners, own their own company. That's how they grind. Right. But there's another important aspect in society and in business, and that's an entrepreneur. And I think AJ is a perfect example of that. He was able to get into a company and get himself in a position where it's like, I'm sure was like, wait a minute. So if I do this, this, and this is the result for me. Right. And it was a win-win for you and obviously your employer. But that's a great path. So people that are watching the show, it's not like you're an entrepreneur or you're broke. That's certainly not the case. There are definitely avenues, but I will say 9 times out of 10, those avenues involve sales, right? Because that's, if you want to make real, considerable money, not carrying the whole bag as the owner, the best way to do that would be sales in some sort, because then you can scale that,
and there isn't typically a ceiling. Like you're not going to have a boss that's going to tell you that, you're only allowed to sell so much, or you're only allowed to earn so much. If you're being paid and compensated based off of your production, then you are gonna go after as much as and people typically, I mean, in my experience of being in sales management for years, they rise to the level of comfort. They rise to because their why is whatever their why is. If it's to pay the mortgage, pay the bills, and to not have a credit card balance, then they're going to rise to that level. If they're going to go beyond that and say, I want to have a future, I want to be able to provide for my kids and potential grandkids, and I want to look for college for them, and overcome the struggles that maybe you endured as a child, because there's some things that you don't want to repeat, and that you want to protect your kids from having to, endure. And unfortunately, us protecting them, and you and I have had this conversation, a number of times, of like letting your kids fail small, while they're small, because if they don't experience failure and everything works out, and this participation trophy generation is really, we're not doing them a service, because the world is tough, life is hard, and you got to be able to bounce back and be resilient. So, yeah.
To your point about comfort, I think that's come up on 70% of our shows. Is
Right.
Somebody brings that up, because I think that's for sure one of the biggest killers of ambition, of
Right.
opportunity, of growth, of all those things. And I'm sure I'm going to mess this up, but I think there's a Rockefeller quote where he says, reasonable poverty is much more dangerous than abject misery. And to the point, like, people get where they were completely miserable, which I was when I was young. I happen to know you were when you were young.
Right.
And you get to a place where, hey, I'm not miserable anymore. I made it.
Right.
And most people, a large percentage of people, are just happy with that, which is fine.
Right.
But that's the killer of the unknown, of
Right.
what your full potential actually is.
Well, it's the snooze button effect, right? So like you're laying in bed, the alarm goes off, and that bed's a lot more comfortable than hitting the weights, or hitting the gym, or doing anything, walking the dog, or getting to work, and and grinding it out before anyone else does. And if you put yourself in those self-imposed prisons, that creates that whole victim behavior of the world doesn't work for me. And it's got there's gonna be a lot of Tony Robbins quotables here, but like, one of the first things that I went to at one of his seminars was, he said, isn't it crazy how, like, does anyone know a lucky person? And raise your hand. There was like probably 400 people in the room. Raise your hand if you know someone who's lucky. And everyone raised their hand. Keep your hand up if you feel like they're lucky a lot. And most of the people left their hand up there. And he goes, it's not a mystery. They position themselves to be lucky because they put in the work to be, to have those opportunities that other people wouldn't have. So you're calling it luck. They're just calling it Tuesday. And I'll never forget. It was just like, and it was a big eye opener, because like there are people that you just go, God, how does this guy just keep like hitting the jackpot? And it's because he's doing the stuff that others
Right.
don't.
And it's a cop out. It's a way to make ourselves, and we're all guilty of it at one point in
100%.
our lives or another. You see someone in whether in your field or not, and you're just like, man, how what does he have that I don't have? And you start analyzing, you start justifying in your mind. Well, that's
Right.
because he's lucky. That's because he came from this or that or whatever. But the truth, almost 100% of the time, is that he's doing what you're not.
Well, and one of the best memes that I've seen out there is the iceberg that they see, the top of the iceberg that looks, pristine and beautiful. And it's, just at, a perfect tip. And, but they don't see the jagged underbelly and how deep those roots go, and you only see 30% of the iceberg on top and 70% of it's below. Now, the success of this awesome, pristine, thing is as a result of that. It's got such a strong base and backbone, which it's one of my favorite, things that it tells the whole story in one picture without any words, and it's like the words that are on it are, what people see and what people don't see, and all the things
Right.
that you put into it, and all the failures and all the, the efforts of doing stuff.
Yep. And anybody it's easy when you get to when you're at least above water.
Right.
I don't like to think that I'm at the peak, that I'm done, that I've built whatever I'm going to build. I assume you don't either.
No.
However, it is nice to at least be above the water,
Right.
And be able to look down and remember all those things. And I'm speaking for myself, I wouldn't have changed any of them, because to your point, those
Right.
are all ingredients that were required to build that foundation to support what it is I'm doing now, what you're doing now.
Well, and the same thing, like one of my really good mentors, he said, you're never a 10 all the way. You're 10 for a day. And meaning that, like, you may be a 10 today, at level 10, but tomorrow you start all over again. You're only as good as yesterday, and you got to start all over again. And sure, it's great to have momentum and it's great to have, the successes that you have, but you're only a 10 for today. Mm-hmm. And that's why you got to, be thirsty for learning. You got to be thirsty for, for adversity. You have to be thirsty for failure, and as long as you fail forward, it's okay. But if you fail backwards and become a victim, that's just the pit,
Mm-hmm. For sure. So, back to kind of your, young AJ. So you're selling stuff as a kid, like a lot of us did, selling candy and whatever, hustling. First taste of some money of your own, I'm sure, which becomes a drug of its own, if you will.
100%.
Yeah. And then you realize, wait a minute, that I could do that, and then you start looking at other things. But again, great. I think, though we jokingly talked about those things, how they're full on like taking advantage of children and child labor.
Yeah, 100%. We were slaves out there, but we got a shiny new Game Boy, but we sold $4,000 in magazines, so.
Right. But again, fantastic learning opportunity. And sometimes in life, it wasn't fair what we did, because again, I have the exact same background in that sense. It wasn't fair that they made all that money and we didn't.
Right.
However,
but they positioned themselves.
Correct.
Well, and to your point of what you said a moment ago about, being an entrepreneur versus an intrapreneur, an entrepreneur, you're going out and doing, you're putting it all on the line. Sometimes, like look at Savannah Bananas, they put up their house for mortgage and, really it was like an all or nothing thing. He was going to be homeless or he was going to have an amazing, outcome, and he had an amazing outcome. But they say that, you're either working towards your dreams or helping someone else achieve theirs, and so even the people that were having these kids go do these sales, that was we were helping them achieve their dream, whether it was a success goal or whatever it was. And they positioned themselves in a position to be able to do that. And then they did what was necessary to get schools involved and get kids doing it. And then it just turned into wildfire. So it's just,
but the second point about that is, however, we were not victims of them.
No,
because of the tools that we got. I wonder how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of kids learn life skills that help them survive throughout their lives and thrive throughout their lives.
100%.
By that silly little job.
And even if they weren't in sales, because, so many people, another mentor, he said, raise your hand if I went to so we sell to a lot of plumbers and HVAC guys. And we went to this guy who was a sales trainer specifically for the plumbing and HVAC industries. And he was talking to the guys and he said, okay, raise your hand if you're in sales. And he's talking to a bunch of plumbing techs. And there was probably about 20 guys in the room and only 2 guys raised their hands. And he said, okay, raise your hand if you're married. Everyone raised their hand. And he said, you never have to sell something to your wife ever? Mm-hmm. Like what you want to have for dinner or what show you want to watch or what movie you want to see or where you want to go on vacation. And you guys always have the same idea. It's like, you're in sales, dude. Yeah. And so then like he kept breaking it down and it's like, there's such a stigma about being in sales that it's a negative thing, but most everyone that is in sales of some kind. You could be trying to sell the barista at Starbucks to give you a little extra pump of vanilla syrup. You're making a sale, or you're not. For sure.
To your point, like I had probably about 6 months ago a meeting with all my estimating staff, and I literally asked them the same question. I asked them what department they were in, and they all said estimating, and and they kind of looked at me like I was out of my mind. And I go, no, what department are you in? And customers, I don't know. They all got kind of confused. And of course, Jake, he knew because he gets to live with me at the time. And he's like,
gets to or has to,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I like to say gets to. Yeah, you're right. But he was like sales because he knew what I was getting at, you know, but just that mindset and realizing, correct, when people say sales, it's either the salespeople, that's like a badge of honor, like we're one of them.
Right.
But the rest of society says, well, you're just salespeople, like you're out to screw everybody. But to your point, literally every single business on earth is in the sales business. I'm in the sales business.
Right.
I solve problems. That's what I sell. Someone didn't have a fire hydrant. Now they do. They bought that from me.
Right.
I mean, and I have to sell myself, my team, my system, my process, the experience that my customers get, just like you do. So it's still sales. I mean, for sure.
Well, and unfortunately for salespeople, most people suck at sales. I mean, I'd say 70% of people that are in a sales role, like a legit sales role, not estimating where they're going to function as a salesman, but people that are in legit sales, they're horrible. And, then you've got telemarketers and you've got door-to-door salespeople. And you think about, like, it goes back even to the 50s, and even beyond that, before the internet even existed, where if you wanted to sell your stuff, you either needed to bring it to the consumer or bring the consumer to you. So, like door-to-door vacuum salesmen, they'd come to your house, they'd sprinkle some dirt on your carpet, and then they'd, vacuum it up. If you didn't let them in the door because they were a pushy salesman that just like put their foot in the door and didn't, and like they'd be interrupting dinner or they'd be doing, whatever. So like, or they'd call and they're always interrupting what you're doing and they're not adding value. And so that's where the stigma really comes from is just, they were never professionally trained to be in sales. And they just do it because it pays bills, but they just continue to do it poorly.
And I think that a lot of those, maybe not necessarily those guys, but the telemarketers, the lower level, kind of entry level, that's the training grounds, right? That's where the stakes are low.
I did that too. Yeah. I didn't even tell you that. I did that too. It was a fundraiser for Special Olympics, and it was selling magazines, and no time was a convenient time, to call someone. And I mean, I was really good at doing it, and I got, creative ways of getting if I can get them to laugh, then I felt like I had a really good chance of getting a hook. And so I was building a personality and finding my own identity as a person and character and stuff. And so that character counts,
So there's no mistakes, there's no regrets on that path, for me, I tell people all the time, like the best bad decision I ever made in my life, among many, as it relates to business at least, was letting my girlfriend at the time's parents insist that I joined Amway when I was 18 years old because they were big in that.
Right.
And if I wanted to date their daughter, it was like,
they were trying to get you into the multi-level so that they'd profit off of their girlfriend's or their daughter's boyfriend. That's awesome.
But guess what? In doing that, I learned how to talk to people. I read tons of books because that was all like kind of required part of the culture and all those things. I learned how to be in adult conversations. I would go up to people in bookstores and start up conversations about how I was going to help change their lives and crap. And it was, I had no idea what I was talking about, but I built the confidence to this day. When I go to meetings and things like that, I can walk in a room and feel pretty comfortable amongst people far my superior when it, financially or just status wise. But that time was like necessary proving grounds for me, because by doing that, it really just gave me the confidence and the skills to accomplish pretty much everything else I set out to do beyond that.
Well, it's just finding common ground, so the more life experiences, once again, goes back to neural pathways. The more stories that you hear, the more stories that you tell, the more experiences that you have, once again, Tony Robbins, he said, your life is like a table, and depending on how deep your neural pathways are is how big the legs are. So if it was, just, a very small 1-inch leg, supporting an oak table, that thing's going to collapse with the stiff wind, but if those legs are 4 inches wide, 5 inches wide, on all four legs, it's got a good base. And so you just got to go out there and go do it. And sales isn't for everyone as an occupation. But for the ones that do it, if you do it well and continue to learn, you can do great.
But I will say, and we'll move on from this, but like the longevity part of it is I think an important thing to bring up too, because for you to be doing what you've done at a super high level repeatedly over and over and over again means you're not screwing people. Right. Because anybody can be a flash when they come back. Pan. Anybody, exactly. Anybody can be a flash in the pan in sales. Some fast talking, good looking guy comes in. I can outsell anybody. And the next thing you know, everyone's coming back complaining. He lied, he this, he that. I'm sure you deal with it all the time in your world. But for you to consistently do that means people that you're dealing with are like, he did me fair, I'm going to go back. And then you start building up that kind of network of people that are coming to you.
Well, and sometimes you're trying to overcome the demons and the skeletons in the closet of what they're dealing with from a prior experience with somebody else. Mm-hmm. So just to earn their trust, I mean, there's apprehension that maybe the first few times that you do a sale, whether it's my business or any industry, that, like you have to, show your value, show your worth, show that it's not all what's in it for me. And then that's how you earn the trust for people to, to come back.
Right. All right, so let's kind of dive back into your story. So you're, a teenager. You grew up in Palm Springs, Palm Desert,
Yeah.
correct? And you went to college in San Diego, correct?
Yeah. And so childhood. I mean, you want to go into?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's do that. So
Okay.
prior to that, you were, sunshine and lollipops, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what it takes to build grit.
It's the Ward and Beeve Ward and June Cleaver.
Yes,
It
perfect.
was perfect. So my mom divorced my dad when I was 1, and I've only seen him a handful of times, like ever, and never as an adult. Just a really dysfunctional relationship. My mom was an alcoholic addict. My dad, was also, and it just was a really abusive environment. So my mom took me out from I was born in LA and took me out, and we went to Palm Desert. And she was a hairdresser for 45 years, and she raised me as a single mom from when I was like 5 to 7, 8 years old. She got remarried. And then he was my stepdad, but he never called me his stepson, never, like not once ever. And when they got married, he even adopted me. And so I took his name, but they were both of them alcoholic addicts, and it was a really toxic environment. I mean, it was physically and, mentally and verbally abusive. For a lot, I'd have child protection services at my house, waiting for us when I left my binder at school in my locker one time, and my mom was like hitting me in front of the principal, like without any regard. I mean, this was the 80s. I mean, you could hit your neighbor's kid and it was okay.
For sure.
But in the 80s, it had to have been pretty bad if the principal called the police. So they were waiting for us when we got home. And that happened a number of times. So it was a struggle, and like, you and I've talked about, like it's a basic human need to have, comfort and love, in your life, and without getting, all touchy-feely about it. But it is a requirement. And if you don't, then other things, happen, and you substitute what you feel is love and comfort and connection, in the vast expanse of what's missing. So since I didn't have that, I turned to food, and I would buy, I was a latchkey kid, so my dad owned a music store. My mom was a hairdresser. The bus would drop me off from school, and I'd be at home for the next 5 hours, until I got home from work, and left to my own devices. And of course I'd go out and play and whatever, but I would order, I found where my mom had money stashed from work in her closet, and I would, I'd take money from her, and I'd order Domino's pizza. And I was probably 8, 9 years old, and figured out, the whole concept of that. And then I knew I couldn't put it in the fridge. I kept it, I had a trundle bed, and I'd put it on the trundle bed underneath. And so I had no idea that you had to refrigerate food and, do whatever. And so but that was my love and comfort, was to have food to be my security blanket. And it was rough, it was a lot of things. And fast forwarding to even going to talk to a therapist about things, I said, I was trying to get to the bottom of where my food issues were, because it's always been a struggle. And he said, explain that, it's love and comfort is, that was your connection. That's how you came to where you're at. Mm-hmm. And so I had a lot of resentment, for what my upbringing was, just because, you shouldn't be hitting your kids. I don't hit my kids, I think I've spanked them once each, and although now that, they're teenagers, you want to strangle them on the daily, but never put my hands on them. And, so I was really upset, and, was trying to figure out, and he said, I'm going to tell you something that's going to really make you upset. And I'm like, so what's that? And he said, people do the best they can with the tools that they're given. Mm. And I said, why did you say that was going to make me upset? And he said, well, because I know that you're in sales management, and I know that you've told me that you give your team tools that they don't use. And he goes, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you're growing up, you're given a set of tools. Some get a lot, some don't. Mm-hmm. And he said, so what were your grandparents like? And I said, well, they were concentration camp survivors. They survived through Auschwitz. And he said, so what about their family? I said, they were all killed. So they had no family. They just had each other. Mm-hmm. And then they, had 5 kids. And
this is your mom's family?
my mom's family, yeah. And they had 5 kids, came to the U.S. with nothing, like literally nothing, didn't speak English. And fast forward, 30 years later, they ended up buying property. They had a 36-unit apartment building. They had a hamburger stand, a liquor store. They had all these things that they accomplished with literally nothing. So when I see people complain about all the, obstacles that they have, I mean, they were killed like a dozen times apiece, and they survived. And they got that survivor instinct. That was the tool that they passed on to their kids. And that was what my mom passed on to me. And he said, I'm going to tell you another thing that it may frustrate you too. He said, you are where you are today, both because of and in spite of what you came from. And it was a big, I don't think I'll ever forget that sentence, like ever, because it was a big eye opener that no matter how much resentment that I had towards them, she did the best she could with the tools she was given. And even with all the drugs and everything, she was never laid on a bill. She was never, she took care of her responsibilities, where most people that are users, their whole life goes down the drain. And she somehow kept it all together. But that was that survivor mentality, and so so I had that resentment, but then it's the greatest gift that I could have received. Mm-hmm. It would have been nice if I would have received it, a little gentler, but maybe that was my path, and that's just, what happened.
Right. Yeah. It's like, it's almost, you look back and you kind of want to go, okay, parents, screw you and thank you.
Right.
Right. At the same time, because you, for some reason, were exactly the parents I needed you to be.
Well, and sometimes it's not, and I've heard it, regurgitated and recycled in different quotes of like, tell me what I need, not what I want, and like, what do I need to hear, not what I want to hear. And, going to today, like, we were talking about the Steve Jobs commencement speech at Stanford. It's an amazing, 20 minutes. But one of the things he talks about is connecting the dots. You can't connect them going forward. You can only connect them going backwards. And because no one can tell the future. But if you look at how you got to where you are today, and there's things that you want to replicate, you have to look at, what got you to that point. And then look at the things where there were pitfalls and, okay, what decisions led to that? And I definitely don't want to do those things. And if you find yourself slipping into that dark space, you just, you got to make sure that you course correct and do it. But you got to have an awareness of it. It's great to have a mentor, coach. Many of my customers, including you, are like some of my best mentors, just because you're dealing with this on the daily, both as someone who's trying to be successful, but you're also, one of the things I admire about you, Jeff, is that like every holiday party, I love going to your holiday parties. And it's because I love to hear the stories about this guy that was just digging a ditch, and now he's running a crew of 30 people or 40 people, or, he's really helping people put food on the table for their families. And it's just like the pay it forward, kind of deal. Right. So it's not just owning a business, but it's what that affords people, which is great.
Yeah, no, for sure. Creating something is something that has been a passion of mine forever. And when you do it, it becomes frankly, your identity.
Right.
It becomes part of you. But anyway, we'll dive into that later, I guess. But so you kind of got through the childhood stuff, and I'm sure some of that'll come up as we're going. But then you made it through high school, obviously, kind of did what you needed to do. Did straight to college at that point? Or?
Yeah. So I wasn't that I was a bad kid. I just needed some direction. My parents sent me to the Army Navy Academy in Carlsbad for high school. And my mom, the agreement that I had was that if I got good grades, I had to get A's and B's, that they would give me the choice at the end of the year to go back or to come home. And I don't think that they really truly realized what options that they were giving me. I was instead of living in Palm Desert with my parents, I was on the beach. I was 85 steps away from the water in Carlsbad, going on aircraft carriers, going to military bases, nuclear subs, shooting guns, doing all the cool stuff. I'm like, this is like summer camp year round. Like, sure, you had to do uniforms and push-ups and, all the discipline, but that structure just really kind of was a good guidance. So they definitely knew what they were doing as far as that stuff goes. But I went all 4 years, and then I went to San Diego State, and, I didn't graduate. I got an ROTC scholarship, but I didn't graduate from college because I was working, and that sales bug, just my why for being in school was so that I could get a job. And I started working for Geico while I was at San Diego State. And I got a really awesome schedule. I worked 4 10-hour days back to back. I had Friday, Saturday, Sunday off every week. And I was on academic probation within my second semester because I was working more than I should have been school working. And the counselor said, if you're on probation one more month, you're going to lose your scholarship and potentially be out of school. And I said, I had an edge to me. And I said, just out of curiosity, what does a bachelor's degree earn you at, and this was 93. So what does a bachelor's degree earn you out of college? And they said, about $35,000 to $40,000. And I knew I was going to ask that question. I brought my W-2 with me and I made 45, selling insurance the year before. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I'm already making 45. So basically I'm going to get a reduction, and she goes, well, working for a corporation, you're going to need a degree to go up the ladder. Cause back then it was a degree or nothing.
For sure.
You didn't get credit for grit, and so I said, I think I'm just going to stick with this. So I ended up leaving college and went to, God, now the kids can't see this video.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to edit that out. Yeah. So I went.
You can leave college.
Yeah.
Kids, if you're willing to do what he's done, right? That's the difference. You're getting a degree somewhere.
Right. And exactly. So I went into insurance full time, and I was doing insurance for like 7 years. And then my dad was having these crazy migraines that were just nonstop. And it was like debilitating migraines, and none of the family could figure it out. He went to Mayo Clinic, he went to all these different hospitals and couldn't figure it out. And so they said, I said, look, I'm gonna leave this. I'm gonna come help with the family business. A little bit of guilt, but a little bit of like, I'm gonna own it. And I was like, I'll try something new. Been doing insurance for 7 years. So I went home and helped with that. And I got involved in the school music program where we rented band instruments. So we got the elementary school kids involved in music because for music, if you have at least 4 years of music education, formal music education, you're going to have an 80% greater chance of going to college. The other part of that is that if you're in a school music program, you're around a bunch of other kids that are in a school music program, and you're around a bunch of other kids that are going to college too. Mm-hmm. So a lot of great effects. I mean, now whether you stay in college, I'm the proof of not continuing it, but it was just a good thing. So when I got there, we had 80 rentals, and when I left 5 years later, it was 850 monthly rentals. And it was just, I just don't do anything halfway. I just, went to all the elementary schools, got all these kids involved in music, and it was really cool.
Awesome. So learned how to sell when you were young, got back in the family business, saw an opportunity, saw a market opportunity that wasn't being utilized,
right,
and applied yourself and the tools that you learned to that point to make that happen. So was that kind of at that time, like if I would have asked you back then when you were building that, what's your future? Would you have thought that was it? Like, I'm going to be doing this until... I was guilted into staying. And so like the program, I mean, obviously the kids, leave for the summer and they would turn in all their rentals, and I'd want to leave every summer because it was hot as hell to be out there. It's 120 degrees in Palm Desert. Mm. And I mean, being there, and I was in my 20s at that point, I was in my, mid 20s, 23, 24, and being, a single straight guy in Palm Desert without a family, I am not fitting it's not round peg, round hole in anything there. So I was like so anxious to get back to San Diego. No pun intended.
No pun intended. And I saw, the word, after the words left my mouth. Sorry, just slap that one out. Put it on a T for you. But yeah, so I just was like, I knew that I wanted something bigger and greater. And, and at the same time, I got complacent. It was really easy. I built it up. It wasn't easy, but it was easy to get complacent after I built it up because it was a good revenue for me. And I started getting into debt, and I just started coasting. And it just was like, I got like $40,000 in debt. And I'm going to go into the next.
Yeah.
So I was staying up late. I was doing online. I didn't tell you how I got there. I was doing online gambling, and I was up like $7,000-8,000. And then I ended up losing all of it and lost like $8,000 to $10,000. And I was just so miserable. And I'm watching infomercials on the TV, and I see Tony Robbins come on talking about personal power, the set that he had.
And this was back in...
This is probably 98,
Okay.
98, 99. And so I saw that, and actually it was a few years later, but I saw that, and then I ordered it, because it's a lot easier to buy something and order it than to actually do it. But I'm like, I'm going to do it.
For sure.
And so I didn't do it right away, but it sat there on the shelf for 6 months. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I started doing it, and I mean, long story short on that, I lost like 40 pounds. I paid off almost all of my debt. I just saved, and I didn't use credit cards unless I absolutely needed it. Didn't carry a balance, paid everything off, and just really turned my life around, I'd like to say by myself, but it was with Tony there with me doing it. And it was just such a huge impact. It was just like, it changed my life. And fast forward to about 6 months before I left the desert, I'm at breakfast at a diner, Keaty's Diner in Palm Desert, with my family. We're there for Thanksgiving. And I see Tony Robbins walk out of the restaurant with Sage, his wife, and the whole family. We had like 20 of us at the table, and he walked behind. I mean, the guy's a beast. He's like 12 feet tall. And so he walks out with Sage, and they saw him, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's Tony Robbins," because it's unmistakable. Yeah. And they're like, "You got to go talk to him," you know? And so like throughout his stuff, he always talks about how people come up to him and they thank him and they hug him and, you know, whatever. I'm like, I got to go do it. And so, so I went out there and went to go talk to him, and I said, "Hey, you know, Tony, you know, sorry to interrupt. You just had, you know, breakfast, you know, and I'm sure you're busy. But, you know, I just want to tell you, thank you, because, you know, you helped me, you know, get my life together. And I'm sure you're in town," because he had these Date with Destiny seminars, and it was a week long, and it was like $7,000 to go to the seminar. And it was just a fully like 360 a view of like how to, you know, just change your life and make, you know, achieve your goals and whatever, especially if you don't have any. And so I just said, "Yeah, I'm sure you're here for a Date with Destiny. And you know, I got out of debt. I lost this weight, and it'd be irresponsible of me to put this on a credit card, because I promised myself, like, you made me make commitments and incantations of what I wasn't going to do, and I would be violating that. And it just is a crazy irony. So you will see me again, I promise, you know, but like, it's not going to be this time." And so I went back to I gave him a hug and I apologized to Sage. She's like, "It happens every day. Don't worry about it." So I go back into breakfast, and I tell the family whatever. And I'm sitting there, and he comes walking back in, and he comes over and he says, "You know, it really touched me, you know, what you said. And you are going to see me again. You're going to see me on Monday, because here's my assistant's card, and I want you to call her, and you're going to be my guest at the seminar. And you're going to be sitting in the front row." And it was amazing. It was just like a life-changing, you know, deal. And like I was blown away. And so I went there and did all the exercises and did the stuff. And one of the things that was the commitment was, you know, set a goal for yourself, write a letter to yourself for 6 months from now and for a year from now, and give us the letter, and we'll stamp it and we'll send it to you, you know, and you hold yourself accountable for things. And one of the things a goal I had was to go back to San Diego. And I said, by June, I want to be back, because this was in, you know, December. I said, by June, I want to go be back in San Diego. And June 3rd, I was signing a lease in San Diego to be back, and didn't get sucked back into the band program again for another year. But then I bumped into him like 2 more times, and I said, "I promise I'm not stalking you. Like, this is like legit." Wow. Like, you know, and got to talk to him some more. And it just, I mean, but it truly, truly changed my life. You know, it was amazing.
Is that, you know, when you mentioned earlier being you know, constantly learning, I think lifetime learner might've been what you said.
Right.
Were you always like that, or was that because of that experience, that maybe the mail home course that you took to begin with, and then, you know, spending that time at that seminar and stuff, is that kind of where that turning point in your life was like, no, I'm going to be unbeatable? I wanted to
know how and why things worked, but I didn't necessarily like need to, it was more so I could do it better. But it wasn't for like an enrichment or fulfillment, which I think is the difference. And the enrichment and fulfillment will still make you better, It'll give you more depth and clarity too. But it was really going to that really said the reasons why. And it was the first time I'd ever heard like, what's your why? Mm-hmm. And the what's your why piece is huge, because why are we doing it? Why are we doing any of this? Like, why are we doing this pod? Like, why did you wake up this morning? You know, and he just, you know, like he really instilled in me, like, if it was big enough, you'll do it. And if it's not big enough, then you need to keep looking, you know, to find out like what's the trigger. And sometimes it's not doing something for yourself, it's doing something for others. So like my thirst for knowledge, you know, like really became like a quest of doing it, right. You know, and I don't really enjoy reading. So like it took a lot for me to read and to go through that. And I would do more videos than reading, and it's still a struggle for me. Like, but every time I read, I'm like so glad that I did. But it's like, and I have to get into the why of like, why am I doing it? Because I need to, you know.
You need to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Right. But like you said, every time you close it after putting in, even if it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, like you can pat yourself on the back.
Instead of the doom scrolling and,
right.
You know.
For sure. We all, you know, those of us who know the importance of that, it's a constant battle to make sure that you stay locked in. But so, I mean, that's a crazy story. And I've been to Tony Robbins stuff multiple times. I've sent tons of my staff. I've sent family members. I've done all that stuff because I know how important it is. And I will say like 90% of the time, those people come back different than they left.
Right.
And substantial amount of the time they continue. You know, it's not a quick rah, I feel great, I'm going to go do this for 5 days and then go back to my old ways.
Right.
There's some of that, but I think people are fundamentally changed when they allow themselves to reflect and learn in that way. You know, it's definitely, we're very fortunate to have been on this earth at the same time as Tony Robbins, for sure. Right.
Well, and it's, I mean, his why is, you know, obviously, I mean, there's a accomplishment and wealth and success aspect of it, but I genuinely feel like there's a love about it. And like some of the things that some of the business model stuff that's pretty interesting. And I don't know if he still does it because it's been a while since I've been, but if you go to one of his seminars, you can crew a seminar and attend it for free if you're going to be a volunteer to crew it, you know, and I've always wanted to do it, and I probably should research, and I don't know if I'd get it for free since I got the first one for free. So let's see if I can pull that one off. But it sounds like a sale in my future, you know, do. But yeah, so you get people that are surrounding people that believe in the power of change, you know, and it's a powerful thing. And if you surround yourself with good people, hopefully you'll have, you know, better outcomes.
For sure.
You are your friends.
Yep. All right. So you're tuned up. You head off to San Diego, ready to conquer the world. Then what?
So I had no job, and I mean, the only thing I had was a place to live, and parents weren't paying for anything because obviously at this point, you know, I'm 27 and, you know, definitely an adult, and they were still pretty bitter about me leaving. And so I left, and I went to go work for the cell phone company that sold us our cell phones for the business, and because they had an office in El Cajon and they have one in Palm Desert. And I called the guy up and I said, you know, hey, you know, can I get a job, you know, doing sales? And he knew me and knew that I was a good salesperson. He's like, yeah, I'll hire you. You know, you could start today. You know, and so Dean hired me, and I went to go work there, and I was working for Nextel, doing corporate sales, just all business to business stuff, and GM had a deal or a contract with Nextel that you could get unlimited phone service for $89 per phone. And at the time, 23 years ago, it was like $350 a month. So $89, less than a third of the cost. And all these dealerships had tons of phones there. So I went to all 26 dealerships in San Diego. Saturn was still around, and all the Chevy, GMC, Buick dealerships that are out there. I went to every single one. And I would just walk in and say, you know, who's in charge of your phone bill? And I'd say, I can cut that bill by 70% without a doubt, you know, and I'd show them, and they'd have bills of $10,000 to $20,000 a month, depending on how many phones that they had. But when I left, it would be like a fraction, 30% of what it was. So I ended up at one dealership, and at City Chevrolet in Mission Bay, which isn't there anymore. And the used car manager said, hey, you should talk to the fleet department. And I didn't even know what a fleet department was. I mean, I never even paid attention. And so he said, you should go to the fleet department because a lot of their customers are contractors, and Nextel had the walkie-talkie radio. Right. And he goes, I bet if you teamed up with them that you could probably get, sell to some of their customers. And so I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And so now I've got a whole new angle. I already conquered all 26 dealers. Now I got to do, figure out what my next conquest is going to be. Made friends with them, fixed their phones, did stuff. And then one of the guys said, hey, what do you think about selling $40,000 trucks instead of $40 phones? And I was like, I don't know anything about the trucks. And he goes, neither do the rest of us, but I bet you could kill it. So I met with the manager and we had breakfast. It was a Tuesday. Went to IHOP in El Cajon. And when we went there, we told me about the job. And I said, well, what kind of money could I make? And he said, well, it's funny. I've got the binder right here. I'm about to hand out paychecks. Here's 4 paychecks for my guys. And one of them was $35,000 for a 2-week paycheck after taxes. I was blown away. I'm like, I was making 75 and I was killing it in phones. So I'm like, this guy's making that in a month, and yeah. So he told me more about the job. And so he said, tell you what, today's Tuesday. Why don't you take a couple days, think about it. Let me know by Thursday and let me know if you're interested and we'll talk more. And so I went home, didn't even go to work, went home, thought about it. It was like up all night and I'm like, phones aren't going anywhere. Like I could always go back to it. And so I called him up at 8:00 the next morning, said, Randy, this is AJ and I'm ready. Let's do this. And he goes, AJ, I'm so glad that you're a Wednesday person and not a Thursday person. I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, well, if you would have waited till Thursday, I would have told you the position's been filled and that, I'm sorry. But I wanted a Wednesday person that was going to, because you have to be a Wednesday person in this business. Time kills all deals. And I was like, oh my God. And brings back another quote of, take advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime and the lifetime of the opportunity. Here, I thought the lifetime of the opportunity was 48 hours, but it was only 24 and I didn't even know.
So he was testing you literally.
100%.
Right.
And so then I said, oh my God, that's great. He said, okay, I need you to go to the travel agent. I need you to go to the DMV to get your sales license, background check, and drug test. And we're leaving on Friday to Vegas. And it was Wednesday. And I'm like, for what? And he said, we have a plumbing show out there. We're bringing 6 trucks out there. We're going to go sell some trucks in Vegas. And I'm like, I don't even know. He goes, don't worry about it. And my first day on the job was on a Vegas trade show floor. I didn't know anything. And I sat there for the first hour just listening to the salespeople talk to the customers that were coming through the booth. It was a great way to learn. And I would just listen to the questions that they were asking, even though I didn't understand what the questions were. But like after I heard it and I heard context and I'd heard the customer's answer, then like I'm talking to these plumbers and I didn't even know what conduit was. I didn't even know what it was. And I said, so what do you think about this tool door that's back here? And he goes, oh man, I could put my conduit in there and it's great. So I talk shop with that guy. And then the next customer comes in. I go, hey, this is a conduit door. You can put all your conduit in there. And I was like an expert, on it now. Right. And you just have to, from couch to sprint as quick as you could. And I'd like to say I sold something my first day. I didn't. But that was the beginning of the, of the career in truck sales.
So when did you sell your first?
My first one was probably, it's actually kind of a cheat because the guy's office that I took over, Bud Bailey, which ironically yesterday I just got an email from him. He's selling lift gates now, 23 years later. He left to go to another dealership and he had a deal that was for a car that was ordered that had just landed at the dealership. And I was the new guy and the file just happened to be on my desk. And they said, hey, Bud's customer is here. Sell him the car. And I'm like, okay. And so that was my first sale. The first one that I made was that weekend. Paul Walters from Service Right Electric. He's in Chula Vista and he's still there. He was my first sale. And so it was within a week of being there. And he totally took advantage of me, Paul. You raked me over the coals, but I still love you. Sold you a lot of trucks.
I'm sure you got him back.
Yeah. We actually invited me on one of his company events. We did a paintball in Corona. And so, I got to take out some love on him there, but yeah, so that was the first deal. And I got really deeply involved in plumbing and HVAC customers and just, really chased it and hustled it down.
So since, kind of fast forwarding or not fast forwarding, but, accruing from then till now, like roughly how many vehicles have you sold?
About 17,000.
17,000. Wow. I mean, I don't know if people have done 17,000 of anything. So to do that is definitely pretty impressive.
Hours of scrolling.
Yeah, 17,000 swipes in a night.
Yeah.
If you're a teenager, for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess as we get kind of towards the end of this thing, I'd like to close, not with everybody, but sometimes I'll say, and I'm going to say it to you, with all the things we just kind of talked about. If this was the last thing you got to say, this was the thing that your kids got to watch to who's their dad for life, for business, for success, for, integrity, all those things. I'm throwing a lot at you, I know.
Yeah.
Leave them some gems.
Well, the first thing is what Colonel Williams from my military school. He was a retired command sergeant major from the. Oh, I'm sorry, he was a colonel in the Marines. He looked at me, and when you got paged to the office, when you were in military school, like they'd say, hey, Cadet Hewitson, come to the commandant's office, and it could be anything. You could have mail, you could have a package, you could have, someone's there to see you. But when you got a call from the commandant, it would say, Cadet Hewitson, report to the commandant. And there was like fear that struck through everybody. And I got caught with some cigarettes that one of the guys, had, and I smoked a cigarette, and it just was under my pillow, and they were checking bunks, and they found it. And I got in trouble. And he had the cigarette sitting on his desk. Because these were found in your room. What do you have to say? And I said, I got them from someone else. And I was like, oh man, I just threw somebody else under the bus, because the next question was, who was it? And I'm like, I'd rather not say. And he goes, I don't really think you have much of a choice at this point. And so I told him, and he said, are you going to do this again? And I said, no. And he said, okay, I'm going to tell you something. I don't know if you ever heard this before, but your word is your bond. Mm. And I didn't know what that meant then. I knew that I had a whole bunch of push-ups and marching I had to do as a result. But I learned quickly after that, if you do what you say you're going to do, and hold yourself to that standard, it's important, because all you have is your reputation. You could work for a great company. You could sell a great product. You could offer a great deal. But if you don't stand behind like what your commitments are to people, then you've got nothing. You really don't. And you might sell somebody something, one thing, or you might have a relationship with someone, or whatever it is, work, personal, whatever. If you say you're going to do something, you want people to be able to depend on you. I'm very difficult with my vendors because I hold them accountable. And so, and that would probably be the second thing, is accountability is huge. And if you can't be accountable to yourself, how can you be accountable to others? And how dare you try to hold someone accountable to you if you won't, do the same.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So word is your bond, accountability, and, and the what's your why thing is huge for just any kind of development in your life. Honestly, you'll have great things. And, we talked at lunch about like accumulating stuff, and stuff's great. And like you said, accumulating the stuff is great, but having stuff isn't fun. Yeah. Having stuff isn't fun, but getting it, is fun, because you had to work to get it. And that's kind of like your trophy on the trophy case, right?
Right.
But, the thing is that what I do tell my kids is that you want to give yourself options. It's not the money, the money will come,
mm-hmm.
But if you want to choose between getting a suite at a hotel or just a economy room, if you want to sit in first class, for that long trip versus coach, if you want to go to a really nice restaurant, if you want to buy something nice for your wife or your mom or dad or whatever, if you want to have the ability to spend time with your kids, if you aren't setting yourself up well, you're not going to have the option to do that. You're going to be working with a very finite amount of options, which at that point, it's not even really options. It's do or die. Like if you don't do this, but options are really a big thing, and it's tough. We didn't really talk about like raising our kids and stuff, but it's tough for them to see what you had to grow up with. Both you and I share a lot of common paths, of where we came up in life. And they don't see any of that. And you could tell them all the stories on earth, but like they aren't going to live it. They're only going to hear it. And until you live through pain and overcome adversity, like you don't see it. So it's like, it's a delicate balance of like, you want them to suffer a little,
Right.
but we're working as hard as we do because of what we came from. And, you know, you have what you have either because of or in spite of, you know, what you came from. And so it's a tough deal, but like, yeah, it's options are a big deal. So work towards your options and, you know what your why is. And that's, you know, kind of like my bundle, you know, as far as that goes.
That's good stuff. Yeah. So I think summarizing what he just said is have a why. And if your why is make a lot of money, you're going to run out of steam very quick because that can't be a real why for a real human being. And, you know, your word is your bond. Be accountable to yourself and allow other people to hold you accountable. And I think things he talked about earlier too was, you know, doing hard stuff, doing what other people don't do. These are things that we talk about on almost every show. And if we do 1,000 shows, I guarantee you that everyone with any level of success is going to have the same basic core values because that's what it takes to find success in life and business, and relationships and money, any of it. Do what somebody else isn't willing to do. Do it joyfully.
Right.
And just be glad that you're on this earth and you get the opportunity to do it.
Do what others don't and you'll get what others won't, you know?
Right.
And
perfect.
Well, and like when I got this job at this dealership, it's interesting, you know, like I walked in with some swagger and I told the guy that was hiring me, you know, I said, look, I'd like to get a guarantee. I'd like this, I'd like that, I'd like this. And he goes, well, we've never done what you're asking for. And I put my W-2 for the last 2 years in front of him. I put my GM sales reports for the last 2 years. And I said, Todd, I go, there's one thing I'll tell you right now. I go, we will never have a performance review, you know, any kind of counseling session about, you know, how well I'm working or, you know, whatever. I said, because I hold myself to a higher standard than you ever could. And when he saw the results not just for 2 months, but for 2 years worth of results, he's like, you know, can you start on Monday? You know, and but that was an option that I had the ability to have that conversation with him and to close that deal on the compensation package that I wanted because I had already done the work. And I mean, the last thing I'll say about that too is one of my greatest compliments, you know, from a boss, has been, you know, when someone tells you that, like you talk about people that everyone can be replaced, and to be told that, you know, you're the only person that, you know, that I've worked with that I couldn't replace you if you were to leave. Mm-hmm. And it was a humbling, you know, deal.
That was pretty risky thing for him to say. Right. Because the wrong person would have said, oh.
Yeah. And then it turns into a leverage, you know, play or whatever.
Right.
But like I said, working hard gives you options and gives you great outcomes. So
summarizing this, there's no secret. There's a secret sauce, but it's not really a secret, right? It's all the things that we've been talking about.
Disagree with me if you think that this isn't true. If you had a bunch of pipeline, this is going to turn into Jeff's interview. If you had a room of 100 people in your industry and pipeline, and you've started franchises, and you know, so you are sharing your secret sauce. But if you were running a seminar and you had 100 people in the room, you know, how many of those people? So different levels. How many people would hear you out of 100 if you're speaking to a room of 100? Just audibly hear you.
Hear me if they're in the room. I guess most of them.
Okay. How many of them would listen?
Much less, maybe half.
How many of them would follow and study? And then how many of them would execute?
20%, and then down to 5%.
If that.
Right.
And 5 is probably lofty. It's probably like 1 or 2 people in the room. Yeah. So I really enjoy like teaching people how to do the fleet business, because there's ways that I've learned that, you know, are really great. And I do it fearlessly because, one, they'll hear me. Will they listen? Probably. Will they do? Probably not. Mm-hmm. You know, so like I could publish, you know, here's a 100-page manual on how to do this. If you're not going to do it, it's the G.I. Joe, right? Knowing is half the battle.
Right.
I said that to someone the other day and I had to explain the reference, which made me feel really, really old.
Well, to your point of what you were just saying there is I use this all the time. And I've told my kids this forever. there's a reason that there's tons of apartment buildings and only a small amount of multi-million-dollar homes.
Right.
Because a lot more people have apartment building work ethic, apartment building commitments,
right.
integrity, you name it. And again, it's not a shot at them. Most of them don't want to do what you've done, don't want to do what I've done. And that's fine. I'm not even saying that we're right.
No. And it's the fear. I mean, there's also a factor of you don't know what you don't know, you know, and like if you were to talk to 20-year-old Jeff today, I mean, you could have a 4-month podcast, you know, nonstop with 20-year-old Jeff and say, here's some things that you made my 50-year-old Jeff life's harder, you know, but here's a dozen other things that you learned as a result of some of the bad choices that you made because you didn't replicate it, or maybe you eventually stopped replicating it. Like, you know, you found success. And that's the thing, is that, you know, many people don't have good mentors. Society is just a different time, and everything is on clicks and scrolls and likes. And people are looking for validation constantly. And one of the hardest thing about, you know, when I talk to business owners, they talk about is that the employee has changed significantly. Like, you know, 20 years ago, you could tell someone to do a task and they would do it. You know, now you tell someone to do a task and they want you to be part of it, you know, and participate in it. Because if you didn't see it happen, then it didn't happen. Because of that whole, you know, social media aspect. That's why everyone's recording what they ate for dinner, you know. And so that part is a bummer. And it's like, Joe, if I had the time to sit and watch you show me do this, I would have just done it myself, and I would have done it in half the time. But I've got 24 other things I need to be doing right now. But they're really, I mean, they feel validation from you participating in their activities, which it's a bummer. It's like, I don't envy you being a business owner because it's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that however, for those of you out there that aren't business owners, that maybe are employees or getting into the workforce, the opportunity because of that is...
The bar is so low.
Right. The opportunity is amazing compared to the 80s when you had to fight for a job at a pizza place, right?
Right.
So now it's like, if you're really willing to show up, work hard. I mean, the exact same clothes I was going to use for entrepreneurs, high-level entrepreneurs, the exact same, you know, summary of this podcast can go for the young kid out of college, probably out of high school, because most aren't going to college anymore, or a large percentage.
Right.
But the principles are literally the same. Tell the truth. Do hard shit.
Right.
Do what maybe other people don't want to do. You're not better than anyone else. Do whatever it takes. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Right.
And then you wake up an overnight success and life worked out.
And the only other additional thing I'd throw in there is, you know, for the philanthropy part of it, and it doesn't necessarily mean charity, you know, helping somebody. I mean, the best way to learn is to teach. Mm-hmm. And when you're teaching somebody how to do something that you do well, that they either have never done or they're struggling with, one, you just created a stronger ally. Two, you may have just changed somebody's life. Like when you think about, like I've said this before, like, you know, I don't look at just the fact that I sell trucks, you know, like what I do, like you couldn't do your job without me doing my job. Mm-hmm. Now, me in the collective sense of just a car dealer, you know, I mean, I feel like I give a level of service greater than what you'd get from the average guy. But like and so because I sold you a truck, you were able to hire somebody, have them do a job. They get paid for it. They, you know, take care of their wife and 2 kids. They go to school. They, you know, turn out to be other things. And the legacy just keeps going on and on. And like, I'll talk to some of my vendors and I'll thank them out of the blue, or even the people from GM, like the ones I've had long relationships with. I'll say, do you realize how many kids that you've sent to college? Do you realize how many households that you've provided for in helping me get these 10 Silverados built? Mm-hmm. You know, and it kind of gives them pause, and no one's ever heard that before, like ever. Right. And no one ever thanks them like that. Right. You know, so the gratitude, I mean, that would probably be the first pillar of the message for my kids. And if you live, you know, with gratitude and you realize the opportunities and the options and the things that you have, and you live it with grace, you know, like you appreciate it that much more. And if you like it, you want to replicate it, you know? So we try to tell the kids, you know, be gracious for, for what you've got.
A mantra that I live by, and I'm gonna have to close with this, is always grateful, never satisfied, because it sums it all up. Of course, I'm grateful, but I'm not done.
Right.
Because you don't want to be always grateful, always comfortable. Right? It's always grateful, never satisfied. You live with that. You appreciate what you have, what God's given you, and yet you want to continue to strive and grow and become a better version of yourself every day. You're literally unstoppable.
One, do the best with the tools that you're given.
Correct.
And try to change your stars, try to change your story, and not replicate, the bad stuff that you came from, and because of what you came from, to offer a better pathway for others.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, AJ, for coming on the show. And
Pleasure.
for those of you, I hope you guys enjoyed it and got some great tidbits from AJ and myself. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks.